All right, Jordan, we're going to do our 6th installment.
There
I
we
said
go.
that correctly.
Yes.
Of the Augustine podcast on Free Choice of the Will.
Salve, everyone.
So, I got a good feeling about today. You know why I have a good feeling about today?
Why is that?
Because at 2 o'clock today, I realized I was wearing my polo shirt inside out. And I think it's going to be a really good podcast.
Great start to the week. Absolutely.
So, we are going to be covering Book 2, chapters 4 through 8.
Yes.
But before we do that, I'm going to do something that you love that I do, which is to sort of slow us down a little bit and kind of hold back the reins a little bit.
Recap.
I think I went back and I reviewed the tape from the last podcast, and I think we did a really good job. But I think there were 2 things that were sort of obscure in what we did, and I wanted to begin this podcast by clarifying it a little bit.
Sure.
One, I think it was a philosophical question that we didn't have time to really clarify, and the other was kind of a procedural thing that we sort of glossed over, and I think it builds on some of the things we're going to talk about today, so it's necessary to do that. So, but the first is a philosophical thing.
Okay.
And last podcast we made this distinction between plain old sense perception,
Right.
the inner sense that coordinates all of sense perception, right? And the faculty of reason or understanding that allows.
I feel like we kind of stumbled a little bit with that.
I thought we generally did a good job. And maybe after I say what I think we didn't do good enough, you should say where we may have stumbled as well.
Sure.
And because we don't do any planning in advance,
Yeah.
and people may not know
Very
that.
organic podcast.
People may think, what I'm saying is we may actually end up at the same place. So something that was unclear to me is we struggled with this question about whether or not we are in agreement that humans have reason, will, and desire,
right.
But animals just have will and desire. And I want to make sure something we were trying to address was whether or not an animal's will was independent from its inner sense.
Right.
Okay? And or if there was just the inner sense that was buoying the animal about, and whatever was the more pleasurable sort of set of sensations, it would go down that route. So I guess the thing is, like, have we made it clear enough that the will is independent from the sense data and the processing of that sensation by the inner sense in an animal? Do you understand what I'm saying? I don't know if we made that distinction clear enough, not because we were being sloppy, but because we didn't have enough time to really address it. And I'm not really sure Augustine really spends a lot of time on it, to be honest.
I mean, I don't think he does, but I do think that it merits discussion, because I think that it's really easy to sort of like lump everything in all together, just for almost convenience, you know what I mean? Or just for sake of like making some parts of the argument just, go more smoothly so you can move on to the next thing.
Yeah. So what do you think? Do you how do you think of the will being distinguished from the inner sense? Like, or would it be sort of we talked about in a scenario where we talked about Evodius in our last podcast put to Augustine, why couldn't God have created human beings that had constrained free will, right?
Right.
And I think the conclusion that we reached on that it was sort of impossible to have beings that make actual choice if we delimit all desire altogether so that the will just sort of marries with reason. We said that they would be sort of indistinguishable, and for all intents and purposes there wouldn't be a will.
Right.
Would we say the exact same thing with animals? Since they don't have the rational capacity, would their will be so married to desire that it doesn't really make sense to speak of them as having a will? Or could we still say that they have a will in some sense, even if they are driven just by inner sense and not understanding or reason?
I mean, I tend to think of it as that, like, they're all separate entities that kind of work together. The way I sort of like think about it is it sort of like a clock, and like they're all separate gears, but they all work in tandem with each other. So we might have more like an intricate clock with like, reason and will and the inner sense all working together, but there might be, you know what I mean, like a simpler version with animals, but they're two separate things, but they still work.
How can we
together.
give an example of where an animal will is separable from the inner sense?
Ooh.
You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
that we could actually bring out the difference and say, no, they actually are two different faculties. I wonder. I'm just spitballing
I'm trying to mull over a concrete example.
What a situation. What's the biblical expression? The flesh is willing, but the spirit is weak. Mm-hmm. Does that help us at all? Like, could an animal's flesh be saying one thing, but its will, its spirit, whatever you want to call it, is still sort of disobedient to its flesh in some way? Could that be a scenario that could happen?
Well, I was kind of thinking with like dog training and stuff like that. You know, you first get a puppy and you're trying to like train them. You know, there's like that disconnect between like what, but then I feel like that's almost bound up in desire though, right? Like if, you know, you're trying to like, if your dog wants to go, you know, chase a ball, but then you want to train them to sit, then you use food, you know what I mean? So it's like, is that like hunger overriding that desire to go chase the ball and like listen to your commands and sit? Or, you know, is that like desire? You know,
Is it more just conditioning and the inner sense is sort of taking that in or whatever?
Right.
I don't know. It's difficult. But I mean, I guess the thing is, like, would we say that the animal will is sort of negligible if everything is sort of based on conditioning?
Yeah. That's the thing. That seems like the natural conclusion, but I'm somehow reluctant to get pinned into that corner or make any sort of, you know, an affirmative statement on that.
I don't know. Maybe we've gone as far as we can with it, but I don't know. I wonder how this may sort of change the Augustinian hierarchy. I mean, it's certainly going to be not the same type of free will that humans have, because it can't participate in reason. It can't experience the felicity of virtue. It's a much more minimalized sense of will. It's just being able to maybe choose between different outputs that the inner sense is giving it.
Right. Or even something as limited as like freedom of movement or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, something as minimal as that.
Yeah. I think I'm probably getting hung up on it. I think this is probably the third episode where I've like tried to be like, where is their animal choice? But I don't know. But going on from that,
we can just table it and then it might work itself out.
What about you? What about from the last podcast? Did you think there was something that we didn't handle well in this sort of in this hierarchy, in this fitting together of animal and human components?
You know, I think that there's just, you know, things that we grapple with, but that's the beauty of this text and like the beauty of this podcast is that we just both get to like grapple with like these like, you know, answers, and sometimes they are unresolved, sometimes they kind of resolve themselves further down the line. So I think that the point that you brought up though, I think that was like something that we kind of both were like struggling with, but now that we've talked it out now, it kind of makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah, at least we're dwelling on it. At least, I mean, maybe we'll just say, put this in brackets. Hey, somebody research this and give us the answer, because like we keep running.
Like help.
Yeah, like because we keep running up against it.
We're just like running into a cement wall.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem to be going away.
Yeah, there's some problems that are a little bit more persistent.
All right. Well, were there any other problems from the last podcast that you thought needed clarification? Because there was one other thing that I think we needed to clarify, and this is largely procedural. So that we can start chapters 4 through 8 today.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So we mentioned I don't think we anticipated getting to the point where we would enumerate the 3 questions that Evodius tries to get Augustine to answer. We know that it's going towards a proof of God, and we were like, yeah, what were those 3 questions? Right. And we're like, you know, so we maybe established that goodwill is something, but we hadn't established the answers to these 3 questions, and one of them is, can God be proven or proved? Right. But Augustine is going to also need to show that God bestows goods, right, rather than just sort of taking that for granted, and that certainly that goodwill is, or that a free will is a good thing. And I think Evodius might be willing to concede that a free will is good, given what we've said about how it allows for the will to experience temporal happiness and to be adjudicated in a grand cosmic scheme.
Right.
But we still don't know yet. Augustine hasn't really shown that there is a God and that God is the gift giver. So that's going to be a lot of where the trajectory of this book is going to go today.
Right.
So I just wanted to clarify that in case anyone was sort of confused.
So he kind of, Augustine at this point kind of answers to the questions, and the question of how is God's existence manifest is like primarily like what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. Do you want to, should we jump into that?
Yeah.
Are you ready to go?
Yeah, might as well.
Okay. So, this is, I had to start taking notes.
Right.
I usually do this off the top of my head, but like it starts to get a little complicated.
Yep.
Okay. So we've been establishing this hierarchy, this cosmic order, and the difference between individualized sense perception and inner sense that governs all the sense perception, reason. We've been doing this not only to understand the Augustinian worldview, to understand his sort of categories and stuff like that, but there is a point to this, right? And the point is going to be proving God. And so as we have looked at the hierarchy between individuals, the types of instantiations that we have on Earth, and the different sort of faculties they have, Augustine's how is he going to use these things to ultimately get to the idea of there being a God?
I mean, it's the way that he goes about it. You're like, are you what?
Yeah.
It's really cool because I mean he goes through. He almost works his way to like base to like more divine, using sort of like inner sense and like basic material things and things that we can perceive, through like touch, taste, scent, all that good stuff. And then he says, okay, and then it's almost like a chain of command, right? Of like sensory input.
All right. So dwell on this chain of command, right?
Sure.
So we've got an individual sense like sight or smell or touch or something like that, and then we've got the inner sense, and then we've got reason.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
What does he say that the inner sense does to the individualized senses? And what does he say reason does to the inner sense? And then let's sort of illustrate that happen. All right, so what did we say the inner sense was?
It's basically like what governs all of the other senses. So it's like almost like this idea that like sense itself, which is like really that's such a weird, vague statement, but like the idea of like sense in terms of you can perceive a material object through like you could say like texture by looking at it, is it like rough or smooth, or by actually like feeling it in your hand.
Right.
So that's sort of like what's associated with like the inner sense.
So you say the inner sense governs
right.
the individualized senses.
Yes.
Augustine will use another word. Governs will be perfectly acceptable, I think, but he'll say the inner sense judges.
Yes.
Judges.
That's the key word, key phrase.
Right. And he's gonna and the premise in this argument is that which judges is. Can you complete my sentence?
It is like that which judges is superior to which it judges.
Exactly.
Yes.
It is going to be that which
Nailed
is
it.
judged is inferior to the thing that is judging it.
Right,
Or
exactly.
that would be another way of saying it. So the inner sense judges the individualized senses, therefore it is superior to it.
Right. And then reason judges the inner sense.
Right. So therefore
the inner sense is inferior to reason.
Okay. So ultimately, Augustine's going to say, if we can find something that is not judged by anything else, but judges everything else, then that thing is going to be...
Then that like whatever is superior to reason has to be God.
But only if nothing is superior to it.
Right.
So this chain of judging has to end, right?
He creates like a stepladder, basically. That's
Right.
kind of like what I picture.
All right. So here's the question. Why is reason not God?
Okay.
Why is your
reason?
why is I was like
reason,
touching your
yeah.
head? Why are our brains not God?
Which I thought was really cool is he says that reason can change.
Right. So he says that.
So he says that.
So
right,
yeah. Okay.
So like
go.
reason changes. So if
Why is reason changeable? What does it mean for reason to change?
Because it searches for, there are times where it searches for truth and it doesn't search for truth, which I thought was like really cool. So the fact that it's not eternal means that it can't be God.
Right. So like your reason,
it's fluid, so it's not fixed. God is something that's eternal and fixed.
Your reason is always sort of searching and taking.
It's constantly shaping.
It's growing in the things that it knows or whatever, right? And our reason is fallible, right? Like we can make errors in our reasoning, right?
Right, exactly.
So like
you can be guided by a false like chain of reasoning.
Right, like I could do, like I'm sure, and that's I'm not diminishing the value of the product that we make and we put on tape or in our lecture series. I'm sure my reason has messed up. Mm-hmm. I'm sure my reason has messed up in the course of this conversation.
Right.
That's okay. You know, that's okay. And, you know, we encourage people to point out the flaws in our thinking because we want them to be a participant in this process and to understand that there are no experts on philosophy and that Augustine in his own reasoning may have messed up. Aristotle messes up. Nietzsche messes up. We all mess up, and that we have to all sort of participate in this corrective process of philosophy. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is that reason cannot be God because it messes up.
Right, exactly.
Even though it can effectively judge a lot of things, it's not eternal. It's not immutable. But we have to find something that is going to be eternal and not fallible, and that can judge this fallible reason, right? Mm-hmm. Right. So, and then if we can find that thing, then we can say that maybe that thing is God.
Right.
But we're kind of a couple moves away from that still. But so, do you think that's clear about? I mean, what do you think about this idea that which judges is going to be automatically superior? Do you think that's a good? Do you think that's an infallible truth of reason? Has Augustine reasoned correctly that which judges the thing beneath it is automatically superior? I mean, are you okay with that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to roll with it. The one thing that, I kind of wanted to pick your brain about was this idea of, like he says that, reason is grasped by reason itself.
Yeah, you're right. That is.
Yeah, and he just kind of says.
What about that?
Right?
Do you want to start getting into Hegelian phenomenology of spirit? I mean,
oh God,
because I'm screwed.
So I just thought it was interesting of like how you could grasp something by itself, like using, you know what I mean? Like, how do you grasp reason by means of reason?
Well, this is going to be a lot of, what philosophy does. Specifically, this is what it's going to be the Kantian project, because Kant is going to use reason to delimit the reach of reason, and that's going to be a major sort of German idealistic sort of turn where the reason is partly limited and is shaping a lot of the reality that is coming into the brain. So, I'm going to bracket that one.
Okay.
It's too big.
Okay.
Too big a question for our aims
scope
today.
Right now.
Yeah, like I'll get to the Critique of Pure Reason and Hegel eventually, but so I guess the thing is, so we've got this sort of chain of command, the step ladder for trying to understand what judges what, and a potential pathway for proving God. Now I got to do some talking while I consult my notes so I can figure out the next move, because this argument's very important.
Right. So, I mean, personally, I thought that the way that Augustine organizes, his sort of like hierarchies, it's really cool if you think about it, because the way that he describes perception and, a lot of stuff that has to do with biology is like pretty progressive for giving sort of a vocabulary to describe things that, there wasn't a scientific vocabulary for. So the way that he talks about sensory input and the creation and the hierarchy, it's pretty streamlined and it's pretty cool. And I think that's when you ask me, can you get on board with it? That's why I said yeah, because it kind of fits nicely together.
What's interesting is that I don't often see philosophical or rational arguments changing a lot of people's minds, but since we've started doing the Augustine text, I've actually seen it sort of eat away at you. I can see.
I think it's like Stockholm syndrome a little bit.
He's holding you hostage.
Yeah.
All right, so Augustine has to. The next move that Augustine's going to make is that he has to find something that is going to be infallible, eternal,
right.
and common to everybody.
Right.
And in order for that thing to be God.
Right.
Okay? But he's not going to start off talking about God. He talks about something else. What does he talk about as being this thing that is always going to be true? It doesn't matter who you are. What is it that he starts talking about
it's
in this
number. He finally gets to the numbers. It's so cool.
He's going to we're not going to talk about God. We're going to talk about math.
Right.
So what does he say there?
I mean, he calls, so he pretty much uses the example of, 7 plus 3. That's always going to be 10, and he calls it an incorruptible truth.
What does it mean that 7 plus 3, and that may be obvious to everybody,
right.
But let's slow this down. In Kant, just to work in a Kant, this would be known as an a priori truth, meaning that this is a truth that's not based on experience. And
it's like a universal.
And what does it mean for a truth to be universal in this respect? What does it mean for it to be a priori or to be universal?
I mean, just.
It's obvious.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I mean,
it's just
like, why are you asking me these dumb
questions? Just something
questions?
that you cannot contest. Like the sun rises and it sets. That's something that you. Well.
I don't know if it's I don't know if that's the
right?
same sort of truth as
it's
a
not
mathematical
axiomatic,
truth.
But
the sun may not rise tomorrow.
Okay, Luke.
No, but I'm being very serious in terms of logical deductions and things like that's an inference.
Really?
Yeah. It's just because the sun has risen every day does not mean that it will rise the next day. It's likely that will happen, but there will come a day when the sun becomes a gas giant or whatever else and engulfs the earth, and there will be no sun to rise anymore.
And perfect example, teachable moment, perfect example of flawed reasoning right here.
And the difference between an a priori truth and or what Kant would call a synthetic truth, a truth that's based on sort of experience or whatever. So I'm glad I slowed you down here a little bit, because the sun rising does not have the same sort of universality as a mathematical statement. Even when the sun expands, engulfs the earth and kills everybody and no longer rises in the way that it traditionally rose, guess what will still be true?
What?
Math.
Yep.
Math will
we might be charred.
There will be no one around to do math, but according to Augustine, 7 plus 3 will still equal 12. I mean 10. I'm sorry. That was a dumb joke. I said a bunch of smart things, and then I made a simple math error for comedic effect.
Round of applause. Round of applause.
I wish we had a laugh track for the show.
Yeah.
It would be really great.
Too much hubris.
Yeah.
Too much.
But so 7 plus 3 is going to be an a priori, independent of experience, timeless, regardless of there being people or not, truth. Yep. It will always be the same, regardless of what conditions obtain in the empirical realm. But that's a lot of people. There are some that just because I say that doesn't make that true. There are actually a lot of people who work in the philosophy of mathematics and the philosophy of science who will say that things like numbers don't really exist.
Right.
That they are really predicated on the schema of the human mind, and that should all humans get incinerated by the sun one day, that math would cease to exist as well. So this is actually a hotly contested debate, and it goes back all the way back to Plato about the nature of number.
Yeah, actually, I was kind of trying to.
Oh yeah, you brought the Timaeus. I would love to do a lecture series on Timaeus one day.
Yeah, so of course, I was rifling through because I couldn't remember which dialogue or which work it was. And I was going through the Republic, and I was like, number, and I was like, oh wait, Timaeus. And
what did you find there? I remember him having some really interesting things to say about number.
I didn't really get to get through scratch the surface at all, but. That idea that there's cosmic beauty and universal harmony with number.
Totally.
And it was just,
Yeah.
it's like really cool, awesome, crazy stuff that I didn't
Some
even really
Matrix
get.
shit, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
that's good. So presumably, he says that math is going to be this thing that is universal for everyone, that's totally incorruptible. It's going to be the same for everybody else.
Yes.
But then he makes this move. He equates math with what?
He does it like, he uses that as like to show that there's like actual, like a manifest proof of God.
Well, okay. I'm going to slow you down there.
Okay.
I'm going to slow you down there.
All
But
right. Fill in the gaps for me.
Walk me through that. How is he going to connect? And I don't know if we're going to be able to finish it today.
Oh boy.
Because we're at 25 minutes, and that's fine. But help me understand where he goes after he says that math is eternal and incorruptible and universal. He's going to equate it to something, and we need to. It's very important that we equate it to something. And Evodius is skeptical of this equation. What does he say that math is equal to?
I mean, does he equate it? I mean,
He
he
said-
says something about truth? No, like,
You're close. You're very close. He equates
what's
it.
the eternal?
Yes.
But
He says that there's
dancing right
something
around
else. He says that there's something else that is eternal, just like math. It's in the name of what we are, philosophers. We are lovers of
wisdom.
Exactly. There we go.
Thanks.
Yeah. So he's going to say that
Thanks for the freebie.
math and wisdom are both
Right. Okay, thank you for
eternal
jogging
and
my memory.
incorruptible.
Right.
But
And it's something that we can all participate in without changing it.
right.
Right.
And Evodius is going to say,
We can apprehend it with our minds without. Right.
Evodius is going to say, whoa,
Yeah. Like.
wait.
hold up.
You're going to tell me that 2 + 2 = 4 is the same as wisdom? That doesn't make sense. You're going to tell me that all wisdom is the same. First of all, I don't even know what wisdom is.
Right.
And even if there is wisdom, why should I believe that it's universal? Why wouldn't it make much more sense that wisdom is relative? That the wisdom is going to be not like Jordan and Luke working on the same math problem, but there will be multitudes of wisdom depending on the trade or craft that we practice. So that the wisdom of the yoga teacher, the philosopher, the librarian, the welder, like all of these things are going to be different types of wisdom.
Right.
And why is it problematic to have different types of wisdom?
I mean, that's the thing is like if like you predicate wisdom being an aspect of God or the divine, and then if you make it mutable and changeable, then it loses its affiliation with God.
It's not eternal. It's not immutable. It's not
Right.
incorruptible. It's going to be something that
Just like kind of like Plato, that you can just kind of like shape to whatever you want it to be.
Right. But we haven't even started talking about God yet. I mean, if we're going to equate it to math, like it's got to have the same qualities as math. It's got to have that enduring universality to it, right? So that's super strange, right? Like this is a pretty crazy idea to say that wisdom is just like math, right? Like that it has these universal qualities to it. So in order for Augustine to make the case that wisdom is just like math and that it's like enduring, he has to describe what wisdom is. That's saying that the wisdom of the yoga teacher, the welder, the philosophers, and the librarian is all the same. So he has to give some attributes to wisdom. He has to. And do you recall what the attributes are that he gives to wisdom?
I mean, I think that like the one thing that kind of like stood out was the description of it sort of being like a sunset or like sunlight.
Oh my God, that metaphor is amazing.
Yeah, which is like super cool that everyone can take in and experience, and it's not owned by anyone. That's what stood out the most in my mind is this idea.
Yeah, we're gonna have to dwell on that a little bit. We may want to close out with that because it's really poetic. And I think we have
beautiful,
to.
yeah.
It's
It's
one of the most poetic moments in the Augustine text. And you don't really think about this text being. None of these philosophy texts, with the exception of maybe, I don't know, you do someone like Kierkegaard or someone like that, you would think that people who like are very actively trying to portray themselves as poets, like, are you going to think that they're poetic? But there are some just really spellbinding moments of literature here. And this metaphor that Augustine's going to use to illustrate The Nature of Wisdom is one of my favorites. But he says that wisdom has three qualities. That no matter who is employing wisdom, anyone who employs wisdom is going to have these three things are going to be part of it. Do you remember what they are?
You know, I got so caught up in like the semantics of like the different like sharing, sense perception.
Yeah.
I went far down the rabbit hole in that one. So
well, he says that the wise seek the good,
right,
that they also want happiness, and that they avoid evil. All right? So anyone who's practicing wisdom seeks the good, seeks happiness, and avoids evil.
Right. And that's where the goodwill comes into play too.
Right. So why does Evodius say, whoa, that's not going to be good enough for me, Augustine? Like, just let's say I were to concede that yes, that wise people do in fact seek the good, seek happiness, and avoid evil. Like, just because that could be true doesn't make wisdom universal. And Evodius do you remember why Evodius says that that's going to not necessarily make wisdom universal?
Ooh,
it has something to do with the metaphor you just brought up.
I mean,
go through those qualities. Seek the good, seek happiness, avoid evil. So,
yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to. It's there. I'm just trying to spit it out. Cat's got my tongue today. I mean, I feel like it's kind of like one of those things that they're like the highest. It's like I'm just trying to think.
You're there. The highest good. The highest good.
It's like kind of like Plato. You know what I mean? Like you want to participate in the highest and greatest form of it.
Okay, so why is that problematic? Why? So why do you say it's like Plato?
It's because it's like.
I know
the words aren't coming to me.
I know you know the answer.
Yeah, sorry. You just gotta. My like mouth isn't like catching.
Do you want me to?
Yeah, you gotta
get
just
off the hook?
just spit it out for me.
Evodius is gonna say, okay, true. Like all individuals may seek the good, but they are going to define the good differently.
Exactly.
Right?
Thank you.
So even if all wise people have these things where they seek the good, seek happiness, and avoid evil.
Right, everyone's gonna have their own definition.
And if everyone has their own definition of good, what's the problem?
Well then how do you seek like the good with a capital G if everyone has like a different definition of good?
Exactly. And then that makes it reduces
how do you find happiness and like how do you find happiness and wisdom if you aren't pursuing like the right good?
Right. So if everybody's got their own conception of the good, it relativizes wisdom again, and it can't.
It just waters everything down.
Right. It can't be universal like math if everybody's seeking out their own personal good.
Right.
So presumably, Augustine's going to have to say that everybody is seeking the good in the same way. They're just applying it to different things, right? And this is where the metaphor comes in. And can you kind of tell people about the metaphor a little bit more?
Yeah, it's really cool. It's about, my translation kind of talks about like the inner light and how like wisdom is basically like sunshine. It's something that is present and that it's unaltered and we can all experience it in the same way without us changing it.
Well, it's going to be like...
Or imparting any...
he says it's like the sun, doesn't he?
Yeah, exactly.
He says that so that everybody is motivated to find the good. It's just like they're going to train their attention to different parts of it. So like, all right, so if we look around this room right now, there's light everywhere, right? But Luke may find the portraits on the wall behind us because I'm interested in painting.
Right.
I
might like the window more because I like architecture.
Right. You're more driven by your particularity to use the light towards making windows, and I'm more interested in making paintings.
Right.
But the thing that Augustine's trying to say is that you and I are both interested in the same good. Right. It's just that our subjective point of view is directing it towards different things.
The points of illumination are going to be different.
Right. So we kind of, but does that completely answer the issue? Because truthfully, that's all the notes I have prepared for today. So that's all I got. But so does that answer the question, right? Like, if if we can set up this analogy where we are using the same good, just pointed at different things. The yoga teacher is using that good towards one thing or whatever. Can we say something about what that highest good is? Presumably that light has to be the same, what that highest good is.
Right.
And I didn't prepare past today, so now Luke is entering into pure speculation land, and I want to ask you about this. And we're at 35 minutes, so it's good, so we can close it up here soon. What do you think that means? Do you think that means like, if the highest good is to, we've talked about the good that we experience within is to practice virtue,
Right.
and abstain from inordinate desire. Presumably, practicing virtue is also going to be knowledge as well, right?
Right.
So when we practice, I don't know. I'm just making a guess here because I didn't prepare past today, even though I've already lectured on this. Is the common light that everybody has the exercise of virtue, and therefore it can be traced back to this good, and that's what universalizes it?
I think a lot of it has to do with like understanding, you know what I mean? And like knowledge and like coming to know things and like understanding. Yeah, so I'm right in the thicket of speculation with you. Because I'm sort of like entrenched in like the first book still with like my lecturing stuff.
Yeah. So did you prepare past today? Because I think you may have been a little ahead of me. Can you maybe fill in the dots a little bit, or if not, we'll just because we're at 36 minutes, we can wait till next week.
I think we're gonna have to answer that next week.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's totally fine.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks, guys.
All right. Bye.